I guess technically I'm a marketing and comms and PR guy, but my background's a whole range of seemingly disparate dots across uh, the not-for-profit sector, startup sector, education sector, sports sector, and probably across all of those threads that marketing comms is the consistent thing. But I think across that time, it's been me looking to do, I guess, meaningful and engaging work, and curious work, and following that passion. So coming out of university, like everyone, I'd been groomed for several years to think that the world would be falling at my feet to give opportunities. But as I finished university, it was the global financial crisis of 2008. And so faced with that, I had a few potential options, but I ended up joining what now would be considered a startup that was called World Championship Sports Network, and it was streaming Olympic sports into Australia at a time when those communities who had passions for things like fencing and rowing and athletics would have had to wait 4 years for that. So it was quite groundbreaking at the time, and it was a two-person business. I was the first employee there, and there was also another, I guess, second arm to that startup, which was creating personalised posters of sports cards for kids, and you could personalize your message on that. So I did that for a year, and then at the end of that year, the bosses said, look, we can't afford to pay you, but we've actually got another job for you. You're starting at Vic Sport on Monday. And Vic Sport was the Sports Federation of Victoria, basically the governing body for grassroots sport. And so I started there, and that was a unique journey as well. And then during that time, I'd been inspired to explore entrepreneurship more broadly, and I started what I guess would be a startup now, which was called Future Talent Sports Cards, and basically enables kids to create their very own sports cards with their image and their name and their text, and be able to order those and have them printed and delivered in weeks. And I know there's a question coming around some of the biggest mistakes I've made. There's certainly a few early ones there that I naively look back at, but I still run that business today. So after spending some time at the World Championship, at Vic Sport, I was on the third floor of a building in Albert Park, and on the second floor was the AFL Players Association. And one day, I was always quite, I used Twitter a lot, a hell of a lot. And I made, in the early days of Twitter, it was almost how I imagined the internet, in its most enjoyable. Everyone was learning, everyone was hacking their way along, and I'd made some friends with a few people who were working with the AFL Players Association, and one of them said, I've actually organised an interview for you to interview for a job as communications, I think it was a coordinator at the time, and they said, if you go downstairs now, the person's waiting for you and you can interview. And so I'd actually just told my boss at Vic Sport that I was resigning because I was going to do this sports cards startup full time. And anyway, I thought, okay, the AFL Players Association. So I went down and interviewed for that role, and got the job, and then had to come back up and tell my boss at the time that actually I wasn't leaving to do the sports card startup, because now I was going to join the AFL Players Association. And so that started a 4-year journey, working with the most elite athletes in the country, telling their stories. And it was at a time when social media was starting to boom. So, right these days, we're very comfortable with the idea of athletes, this idea of athletes telling their stories as brothers and fathers and friends, and really telling, the human side of athletes. But it wasn't as common then. So, that role, I guess, focused on website and social media and, traditional channels as well. But I did that for 4 years. From there, I'd been in the sports sector for around 7 or 8 years, and I realised if I didn't get out, I never would get out. And so I set about the idea of proving that those skills are transferable. And I went and joined World Vision. And so I joined World Vision, and I started as a senior campaign manager. And then I caught up with a friend of mine, Samantha Gash, who's an ultra marathon runner. And she just finished running across South Africa. And I said, look, where will you run next? And she said, one day I'd love to do India. And I said, well, look, why don't we do it? But rather than just run across India, why don't we use running as a vehicle to, explore the barriers to education for kids? That's a passion for yours. And anyway, we came up with this idea and pitched it to World Vision and convinced my boss to let us go over to India and film a pitch video. We said, look, give us 2 weeks, I can't remember what the budget was, maybe $10,000. And we said, we will come back and we will pitch to Nike and we'll pitch to Lululemon. And if it falls on its face, so be it, but give us a chance. So anyway, we went off to India, we filmed this clip, and we ended up making it happen. And then from there, that I spent the next 2 years of my life working on this project where it was a 3,300 kilometre run across India. We lived in a camper van. Samantha ran between 50 to 70 kilometres a day. And as we went, we visited communities that World Vision worked with and focused on telling the stories of people who'd never had a chance, basically giving people a voice who never before had a voice in a country of 1 billion people. And, as we went from region to region and explored the barriers to education, in some regions they were access to clean water, in some areas sanitation, in some areas gender, and all types of challenges. But that ended up being a pretty transformational experience for me. I lost 14 kilo over the 2 years and 8 kilo whilst I was in India. So that was physically transforming as well. But that was an incredible experience. It reached 59 million people globally, raised, $200,000 plus. And as someone who just turned 30, I still can't believe that they backed me to lead that project. But at the end of that, I was physically exhausted, mentally exhausted, and I'd been seconded for so long that my job didn't exist anymore. And so I decided to leave World Vision, and I went on a silent retreat in Bali, and I reflected on, what I wanted to do next. And it was that point I got accepted into the Alt MBA. And so then there was no Australian time zone at the time, so I did the London time zone. And at the conclusion of the Alt MBA, which was the most incredible experience for me, they asked if I'd consider being a coach. And I'd never thought of coaching. I didn't really understand what coaching was, but I thought I'd give it a shot. And so that began that path. And so I've been a coach of the Alt MBA for 3 years, and that experience itself has been incredible. And then I saw a job at the University of Melbourne with the Melbourne Accelerator Program. And I'd only ever considered being an entrepreneur or not being an entrepreneur. I'd never considered this idea of working with entrepreneurs. And I think being a coach of the Alt MBA had sparked some interest in this idea of helping others. So I joined the Melbourne Accelerator Program. So that's a program that really works with some of the best startups in the country. They've worked with over 100 startups. They've raised well over $100 million in funding, over $100 million in revenue and the like. And so I've been there 2.5 years. And then most recently, I had the opportunity to be seconded to lead marketing and communications for Melbourne Connect, which is a new innovation precinct. I'm not sure how much it costed, many hundreds of millions of dollars, and bringing together world-class researchers and startups and corporates and artists to really shape what the future of innovation might be. So once, I reckon I would have been 13, and it's amazing the things you hold on to when someone older than you tells you this. And I think it was said in jest, but someone said to me, find the job that pays you the most amount for the least amount of work. And it really stuck with me. And I often thought about it, and I often thought, he's a really wise person. And in fact, I think the best advice is find what you love or, find a way to throw yourself into everything that you do and be yourself. Like if I look back at the moments where things have been, where I've been disappointed in something I've done, at every time it's when I second guessed what I would do if I was being true to myself and tried to mimic what I'd seen someone else do to get a result. And that just doesn't work for me. And I think, I haven't had this advice, but the observation is people are at the center of everything. And, when I've tried to move things more quickly or do things more quickly and do that without people, that has failed every time. And I think that's been the bit for me that's been continuity, is helping people first, and then, having faith that this world moves. Things are so much richer when we're not in a transactional mindset, for me anyway. There were times when I wished I was more willing to make a mistake. There were times when, I took plenty of risks, like when probably my mum, there are a number of times I jumped sectors or jumped things. And I think I probably now look at it and think, well, if I'd stayed in a certain area, I could have moved up a corporate ladder. But I just always have had a curious mind and just been interested to see how things work. And I think maybe that's what I would have said, understand your strengths, play to your strengths. And I think one thing that I do as well as most is connect the dots, whether that's people, projects, ideas, and really embracing that would have been a good thing. Maybe I would have also said, be a specialist in something. But I think my curious mind just loves understanding how everything connects. And then, I like relying on people. I like being part of a team and working together and bringing people together. So maybe if I was a specialist, it wouldn't mean I need that as much as I do. I remember once I was doing this India project, and I knew there was. So when I joined World Vision, I'd come from the sports industry. I didn't really know anyone. I didn't know anything about the not-for-profit sector. And then when this idea got legs, I was put in charge of leading it for the whole organisation. And I knew there were some people who weren't happy about that or wouldn't be happy about that. They're going, who's this guy? And I had this thought when I could pull together any team, and I thought I'll pull together a team of people, of the people most likely to shut this down. Because I'm like, if I can get them on board, then we're fine. But I picked one too many, and I just couldn't get. And so I remember the first little period where I was just like, I have no one on my side in this team at all. And so that was a mistake I made. In hindsight, I think the one thing that's been consistent is me showing up. Like I've shown up publicly, over 10 years plus. And I think I've always been the same person. Like whilst there might be different careers and different things, I think I have a pretty good sense of myself and being generous and being kind and having faith that the payoff is helping people in itself. I think that. And I think the other thing, as far as what I do well, is I've learned when to bring chaos to order and order to chaos. And I think a lot of people can only do one. And that any environment they go in, they'll either bring chaos to order and they go in and they're like a hurricane, and that's great if that's what the place needs. Or they'll go into an environment that's feels chaotic to them and they'll focus on creating order and they might stifle creativity. And I think that's the skill that I'm continually trying to develop, is to know when to go, when to be able to go each way, and how to shift an environment and inspire and engage people to know what's needed at this moment in time.